Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. Tonight is June 20th, 2016. The show is being pre-recorded on June 19th. But you can catch Truth on the Tracks here every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, ucy.tv. Now, we're going to talk about a number of different things tonight. Of course, we've got to talk about the Orlando shooting. We've got to talk about the international aspect in Syria. We're going to talk about some more domestic issues as well. We're going to get all of that into the show. So I want to start with Orlando because there's so much information that we need to go through, and I think this is one of those issues where even in the alternative media, people may have slightly missed a point or slightly missed who might be responsible for this. And we're gonna try to talk about that. But for those of you who are interested in following my work, you can catch my work at activistpost.com, naturalblaze.com, and eraofwisdom.org. If you're interested in my work specifically, I highly encourage you to go to brandonturbeville.com. That's the website where I repost all of the articles, all of the YouTube videos, all of the archives of this show, and of course the books are available there as well. All the relevant information that you need regarding my work is there, and of course it's updated on a daily basis, so you should be going there every day if you're able to do so. So we're going to do all that. Now, there is an opportunity to support the website, support me, by simply, if you order anything online at Amazon, you can go to brandonturbeville.com, sign into your Amazon account. Before you order anything, just simply click the hyperlink on my website, which is the right-hand side of the page. It says support brandonturbeville.com. Click on that and order whatever you want on Amazon. Go on about your business, complete your order, and I get a little bit of money on that. Not much, but I'll get a little bit, and every little bit helps, and it won't cost you anything extra. So just wanted to plug that. Now also, if you go to that website, right under the support tab, you can find a free copy of The Difference It Makes, 36 Reasons Why Hillary Clinton Should Never Be President. You can have that book for free, share it around, do whatever you want. That information needs to get out. See, since Bernie is now done with campaigning, I believe, because I believe the primaries are over. Hillary Clinton won D.C., I believe, by a sizable margin. This was always going to happen. This was always in the cards. Now Bernie says he's going to take this to the convention, and what's he going to do at the convention? Bernie's going to complain. Bernie's going to say, we fought a good fight. We talked about issues, and we want to hold a vote. Of course, they'll vote for the witch. And then he'll say, but we've got to stop Trump. That's the most important thing, so I endorse Hillary Clinton, and everybody has to endorse Hillary Clinton and start working for Hillary. I would encourage all of the Bernie Sanders supporters out there to have some principles. Say no. Don't vote for Hillary Clinton. Bernie Sanders, if you're a Bernie Sanders supporter listening to the show, it might be hard to swallow, but Bernie Sanders is a joke. He's weak. He's not as great as you think he is in terms of his anti-war positions. He's not that great on civil liberties. He obviously doesn't care about constitutional rights. Remember, he wants to ban automatic weapons in the United States. They're already banned, but he wants to ban them again. So Bernie's not that great. But if you look at Hillary Clinton, my God, how could you call yourself a self-respecting liberal, a self-respecting leftist, or anybody, a democratic socialist or anything, and vote for this witch? You can't do it. You can't vote for Trump, obviously, but this witch has a greater war record than Donald Trump. So that's something that you should keep in mind. Don't vote for Hillary Clinton. You have more than those choices, even in the election. If you can't bring yourself to sit it out, then there's Jill Stein of the Green Party, and that's the same thing for the Trump supporters or for the conservatives who realize that Donald Trump is actually not a libertarian because he's a fascist. Then you've got the libertarian crowds too, and there's problems with Stein and there's problems with Johnson. But if you can't sit out of the election, there's your third-party votes, that you could cast a third-party votes. The third parties have been more popular now than I believe at just about any other time in recent American political history. So there's that opportunity for intervention. But whatever you do, don't vote for Hillary. Don't vote for Donald. Just let them do their thing and let it play out with the masses. Or vote fraud, or however they intend to get it done. You can always sit the whole thing out if there's nothing that is reasonable to draw you out to the polls. My recommendation is to sit it out. If unless there is an issue such as a local referendum, or that you have a candidate in your area that's running, that's a good candidate, something that is worth going out and voting for. If you have to go out and vote, well, then you can look maybe at the third parties or even a write-in. But otherwise, I would say sit it out, because this is the situation we've been given, and we don't want to participate in that. So if you've got a reason to come out and vote anyway, then look at the third parties. But if you don't, then stay home. Now, maybe we'll pick that back up in a minute. But let's look at Orlando, because that is something that's been in the news all day, every day, on virtually every channel. Everybody's talking about this issue, and whether it's in the mainstream or the alternative media, I think a lot of people are somewhat befuddled by this. We have a number of details that are escaping the reporting that's taking place on the mainstream media channels, right? And that's not surprising. Anytime there's an attack of this scale, there are details that escape the public consciousness because of the mainstream media failing to report them, or at least reporting them in the way that they should. This attack could very well have been orchestrated by the FBI or other relevant U.S. intelligence agencies in order to guide public opinion, to galvanize the American people for political purposes, to attack the Second Amendment. There's a lot of reasons that this could be done, and we were going to look at some of those reasons for this in a minute. Now, I've done 2 articles on this. 5 reasons to question the official story of the Orlando shooting was one, and then the other was Orlando shooting a false flag? Shooter has ties to FBI. Regular at club did not act alone. Go check them both out. They're chock full of information here, and you got to. We can't spend all our time following these false flags, but we have to investigate them and expose them when they happen. So for a number of reasons, for our own understanding, so we'll understand where the oligarchy is trying to take us, and also so we can inform others about this, so we can break through the hold that these false flag attacks have on us. Now, in fact, the term false flag 10 years ago was not well known in public circles, but now even the mainstream media has had to use the term false flag in order to try to debunk claims being made by people like me. So it's out there. Now, this attack in Orlando might sound like, an instance of senseless violence, right? We might see this as being somewhat a random act of senseless murder. And what we're getting in terms of reports, we have Omar Mir Sadiq Mateen, the gunman in the Orlando club attack, the Pulse Club. Apparently, and this is according to mainstream reports, he carried an AR-15 rifle and a handgun into the Pulse Club around 2 a.m., started shooting, killed 50 people, wounded 53. There was then a standoff which lasted for about 3 hours before a SWAT team crashed into the building with an armored vehicle, and then they ended up killing Mateen. Mateen had allegedly pledged allegiance to ISIS before the shooting. He called 911 and started saying that he was pledging allegiance to ISIS and the leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, as well as mentioning the Zarnev brothers, the Boston bombers. Mateen was an American citizen. His parents were of Afghan descent. They were from Afghanistan. But Mateen lived in Port St. Lucie, Florida. That's about 125 miles away from Orlando. And that's he allegedly drove from Port St. Lucie to Orlando to commit the attack. Now, we have interesting connections here. So let's go through some of this information in the time that we have. The FBI had investigated Mateen at some point for possibly having ties to ISIS or at least sympathizing with Islamic extremism. Right? A law enforcement official quoted by CNN said that there were 2 cases open involving Mateen, but the probes didn't result in enough evidence to charge him with anything. The investigations were reported by a number of mainstream media organizations, and they were confirmed later by the FBI itself during a press conference. The FBI admitted that Mateen had been interviewed by agents twice in 2013 due to comments he made about radical jihad, which were overheard by coworkers, so they heard something and they said something. So we have an interview. A third interview took place a year later when it was his connection to Monir Mohammed Abu Salha was revealed. All right, Salha was an American who traveled from Florida to train in Syria and then returned to the United States so he could recruit other Americans to fight in the Western-backed terrorist brigades that were trying to overthrow the government of Bashar al-Assad. And Salha allegedly returned to Syria yet again and blew himself up in a suicide bombing. But it's also interesting to note here that Mateen's father, Sadiq Mateen, is a political personality in his own right. And he hosted a TV show. He apparently declared himself a presidential candidate in Afghanistan. Sadiq has denounced the Pakistani government, and he's expressed support and encouragement for the Taliban movement. There's actually... when this thing first came out, there were a number of media outlets, alternative media outlets. I don't know if you call them alternative media outlets. These were sketchy websites claiming that this guy had connections to the CIA. Those connections were never proven according to those websites, but there now is more evidence emerging that shows that, yes, in fact, Sadiq Mateen did have some connections in the Washington political sphere and possibly the CIA. So that's a little more murky, but it's more in terms of evidence. There's more evidence now than there was a few days ago in regards to Sadiq Mateen's connections to the CIA. Now, the question regarding the fact that Mateen was on the FBI's radar is an extremely important one. And one key aspect that suggests a false flag here that should be looked for soon after the attack is any possible connection the suspect or the group of suspects may have or may have had with intelligence agencies. A connection to any one of these organizations and institutions goes some length in explaining how the attack was coordinated, the motivation of the perpetrators, the actual involvement or not of the suspects, and who actually directed the operation. For instance, on 9/11, many of the alleged hijackers had previously had close contact with the FBI, with the CIA, other high-level intelligence agencies, both at home and abroad. We have the Zarnev brothers, for instance. They were accused of masterminding carrying out the Boston bombing. They had ties to the FBI before the attack as well. So in many of these instances, we have connections to certain military agencies and communities that should serve as the same red flag as connections to intelligence agencies themselves, since these institutions have largely been blended together. Now, the FBI informants. This is important. The FBI did a lot more than just investigate Mateen. They introduced him to informants as well. And we have a number of reports here, right? Mateen apparently first entered the radar, at least according to mainstream reports, in 2013 after his colleagues alerted the FBI to the statements he made regarding having family connections to Al-Qaeda. And apparently he told coworkers that he had a family member who belonged to Hezbollah. Well, this is bizarre, right? This indicates a strange lack of knowledge. Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah are mortal enemies. Okay, Al-Qaeda is Sunni, and they're funded by the West, and Hezbollah is Shiite, and they are funded by Iran. Right? These guys are mortal enemies. Hezbollah is killing Al-Qaeda in Syria right now. So the FBI's Miami office opens an inquiry into Mateen, and this is what we're getting from the FBI Director James Comey. He said he'd hoped that law enforcement would raid his apartment and assault his wife and child so he could martyr himself. That's what James Comey is saying. So the FBI investigators look into Mateen, who was born in New York for about 10 months. They introduced him to confidential informants, spied on his communications, followed him, they interviewed him twice, all that kind of stuff. Now, that's the question of the informants, but there's more to this, right? He was not only connected to Mohammed Abu Salha, he was maintaining ties with Marcus Dwayne Robertson. This is a notoriously violent, radical Muslim CIA asset that's been known about for some time. Robertson, he also goes by the name Abu Taba. He has thousands of followers. He was in prison for a short time, and 4 years in jail, which is a short time for what he did. He converted about 36 people to his version of radical Islam while he was in prison. We have him. He lives in Florida. Okay, we have a Fox News report that's quoting a law enforcement official, and it says it's no coincidence that this happened in Orlando. Mateen was enrolled in Robertson's online fundamental Islamic knowledge seminary. Okay, that's gonna be important. Let me go through this, and then we're gonna come back to that online school. Now, police have said that Robertson's Timbuktu seminary is being used to dispense radical teachings. Robertson himself was a former U.S. Marine and undercover FBI agent before he turned into a radical imam. Now, this is the story. This is the public story, public consumption. And he was released from prison despite warnings from officials that he would carry out horrendous acts of violence. He was considered so dangerous when he was in jail that he was shackled with his own security detail away from other inmates. And whenever he was transported to court, the authorities had to have a 7-car caravan of armed federal marshals to escort him. And he eventually moved to solitary confinement after prison officials found out that he was radicalizing his inmates. So he was a Marine for 6 years. He's 47 years old. He went on to become a bank robber. Then he became an FBI informant in exchange for a short prison sentence. Dismissed by the FBI in 2007 after allegedly attacking his CIA handler, and then began preaching Islamic extremism. Went back to jail, and we're talking about Robertson here. He went back to jail for tax fraud in 2011, where prosecutors attempted to have 10 years added to his sentence after discovering documents that were preaching terror among his possessions. But guess what? A judge released him. He got released, okay? Robertson has openly attacked in his sermons, his diatribes. He's attacked homosexuals. We have wiretaps that we have go back to 2011 that show he's instructed his students to file fake tax returns to get a refund so they can travel to Mauritania for terror training. We also have a Fox News report saying federal law enforcement officials were familiar with Robertson as early as 1991. He was a leader of a New York gang known as Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves and robbed more than 10 banks, private homes, and post offices at gunpoint. They shot 3 police officers and attacked an officer after he had suffered injuries from a homemade pipe bomb. And around about that same period, authorities have pointed out that Robertson, who was himself known as Ali Baba, was a bodyguard to Omar Abdel Rahman, who was the terrorist group who led the terrorist group that carried out the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center, which was, of course, an FBI concocted and facilitated attack itself. Now, when he was arrested in 91, he cut a deal with prosecutors who let him serve 4 years in prison before he went to work undercover for the FBI later on, and they're saying 2004, to document terrorist plans to Africa and the United States. So we won't go into all of this, but I want to just point out some things here. This is a guy who served no more than 8 years in prison at the most. I don't have the details of how much he served in 2011, but it wasn't very long because he's been out. So we're talking 8 years at the most. So he's a leader of a gang who has robbed banks, armed robberies of banks, private homes, and post offices, federal buildings, right? So, and he does what? 4 years in jail? He's robbed banks, post offices, and private homes. He's shot 3 police officers, attacked another police officer that he injured with a pipe bomb, was the bodyguard to the terrorist leader of a terrorist organization that bombed the World Trade Center in 1993, and he gets 4 years in jail? 4 years in jail. He agrees to work with the FBI as an informant. That is life in prison, ladies and gentlemen. If you commit any one of those crimes, you go to jail for life. This guy went to jail for 4 years. What does that tell you? The FBI admittedly worked with him as an FBI informant. The FBI was his handler. Notice in the reports what I said earlier. He was allegedly dismissed by the FBI after he attacked his CIA handler. Well, that's funny. The mainstream media accidentally told us that he was not only an FBI asset, but he was a CIA asset as well. So then he comes out and he's suddenly operating a website. Let me ask you this. Mark Zuckerberg is shutting down dissent on Facebook, right? And this is normal dissent. This is just maybe some conservative dissent on Facebook, non-social justice warrior crap. That's getting shut down on Facebook. And if anybody's an activist, you know how easy it is for your activism to be shut down immediately. And you're just trying to protest a bank. You're just trying to have GMO food labeled, that sort of thing. And you know how easy it is for these things to be taken down. But Robertson can run a school. He can run a seminary. He can run the Fundamental Islamic Knowledge Seminary online. You can enroll. You can take classes. You can become a fundamental Islamic knowledge preacher, an imam. Or maybe not an imam, but you can become certified from this idiocy online. Why isn't that website shut down? Has anybody asked that? That's because it's run by the FBI and the CIA. That this should be obvious to anybody who looks at this. This guy was a CIA asset from the beginning, and he still is. So, it's funny, though, that they try to present this guy as a loose cannon to be cut loose from the program. So that would actually mean two things. First, he may have been a loose cannon, but he was still willing to work as an informant. And also, despite his being known as a radical jihadist with a notorious criminal history, he was released from prison on a number of occasions, having served less time than many people have that have had simple drug offenses. So, any of these stories that are purporting to show Robertson as a legitimate terrorist are really just cover for what was and still is a CIA and FBI asset. So it needs to be, addressed that Robertson was known to have acted as the bodyguard for the terrorist organization and terrorist leader that carried out the World Trade Center bombing in 1993. That was another sting operation. Again, the FBI, this has been documented, right? That the FBI wanted them to go live with the attack. The FBI gave them real explosives and did not stop the attack. This was FBI originated. It was FBI created. It was FBI facilitated, and that is who the blame should lie with the U.S. government. Robertson was heavily involved in that. Now, why did I go on such a diatribe about Robertson? It's because he has connections to Mateen. And so I guess at this point, people need some context to understand where we're going here. The FBI has a history of creating terrorist attacks, right? And in terms of the studies of this, I would recommend Tony Cartolucci of Land Destroyer. It's landdestroyer.blogspot.com, and he's painstakingly documented instances of the FBI organizing, arming, funding, directing domestic terror attacks just to foil those attacks later and then claim success in preventing terrorist attacks on American soil, as well as the possibility that many of these attacks simply don't get foiled but are allowed to take place and go live for political purposes. There's a number of good articles that he's got out. One of them is Confirmed FBI Introduced Florida Shooter to Informants. He summarizes a lot of this, but he's got a number of articles that are specifically about the FBI's history in creating these terrorist attacks. So please, landdestroyer.blogspot.com. That's a website that you need to go to and take a look at his work there. We have these informants that carry out they provide training and material support in the use of real explosives. They provide suspects with arsenals of weapons, like the ones used in Orlando or the ones used in other terrorist attacks. And they encourage these guys to adopt some radical ideology over the course of this so-called investigation. They're given the false impression that they're working on behalf of a terrorist organization like Al-Qaeda or ISIS. And they're also what Cartolucci refers to as cultivating delusions of grandeur among otherwise mentally ill suspects. Yes, that's exactly it. They do cultivate delusions of grandeur. And many of these guys are indeed mentally ill to the point of not being able to make decisions for themselves. Now, the FBI's Miami office that investigated Mateen, this is considered one of the most active and aggressive counterterrorism units in the country, right? We have, for more than a year, which ended in April, which is a time which these guys are going to be looking for any clues Mateen may have been missed. The FBI focused on a counterterrorism sting that targeted James Medina, which was a homeless man, and he had mental problems. The FBI informant, it was not Medina, but it was the FBI informant that came up with the idea of this attack and crediting that attack to the Islamic State. If you read the FBI's affidavit, which is in my article, it's in, I think, Tony Cartolucci's article, it's clear that the FBI encouraged and walked Medina through every aspect of the attack and then provided him with what he thought was an explosive device. And when you read Medina's incoherent conversations with the FBI informants, it's clear that he didn't possess the mental capacity to perpetrate these attacks on his own, right? He was incapable of doing this. So there's an article by The Intercept. Before nightclub shooting, FBI pursued questionable Florida terror suspects. And there's a number of these things. There was another FBI Miami office arrest and supposed terrorist of this 23-year-old Cuban-American Harlem Suarez. He was also known as Omlak Benitez. And his former co-workers described him as being a little slow. The U.S. government alleged that Suarez conspired with an FBI informant to bomb a beach in Key West in support of ISIS. The FBI provided the fake backpack bomb. So they essentially organized this attack and gave this guy a fake bomb. They didn't intend for this to go live, and then they arrested him. Right? It's not the first case. We have 2011. The FBI investigated the Boston Marathon bomber Tamerlane Tsarnaev, and agents apparently, according to the official story, didn't deem him a threat. About the same time, the FBI had a 9-month sting operation against Rezwan Ferdows, who had no weapons, no connections to international terrorists, and his mental illness, his mental health had deteriorated so much that he was actually wearing adult diapers at the time of his arrest on terrorism charges. The guy was so mentally ill that he didn't have full control over his own bowel movements, and he was charged with terrorism. He was set up by the FBI, arrested, and then sent to jail. And he had no clue what he was doing. So Ferdows, like Medina, they were both provided assistance by the FBI every step of the way. They were given 24 pounds of C4 explosives. They were given 6 fully automatic AK-47 rifles, 3 grenades. That's according to the FBI's own affidavit. This is what it says. He was brought deep into this is from The Intercept. He was brought deep into a fictional world where he believed he was working directly with Al-Qaeda for nearly a year, told that detonation devices he constructed and passed on to FBI informants were used in Iraq to kill American soldiers. So the FBI has conducted many practices like that in virtually all of their investigations. There's 2010. Go back further. The FBI investigated Mohammed Osman Mahmoud. All right, this is a naturalized U.S. citizen, resident of Oregon. They essentially traveled to a remote location in Lincoln County, Oregon. They detonated a bomb that was concealed in a backpack as a trial run for the attack that he was supposed to commit. And we also have February 2012, where the FBI provided another suspect with live explosives in the lead up to a so-called foiled suicide bombing that was planned with the help of the FBI informants, and it was supposed to take place at the U.S. Capitol. We also have, a USA Today article, FBI foils alleged suicide bomb attack on U.S. Capitol, where they go through this as well. El Khalifi, who had expressed interest in killing at least 30 people and considered targeting a building in Alexandria and a restaurant, a synagogue, and a place where military personnel gather in Washington, but he settled on the Capitol after canvassing that area after a couple of times. That was according to the Associated Press. But Al-Khalifi detonated explosives at a quarry in the Capital Region with undercover operatives. He is not believed to be affiliated with Al-Qaeda. So this is the type of history that the FBI has. And believe me, I just went through a few. There are plenty more to go through. We're not going to do that, though, because we've already gone beyond what we really need to be focusing on this. But the FBI, considering their activities by FBI informants that they've helped arm and train, the FBI, we demand, is obligated to tell the American public what their informants were doing in Florida with Omar Mateen in the 10 months they were supposedly investigating him, beginning in 2013. Did they walk him through planned attacks that he ultimately backed out of? Did he eventually change his mind after the FBI's investigation was allegedly closed? The American media, the U.S. government, elected representatives, etc., they all have an obligation to ask these questions. They all have the obligation to obtain that information from the FBI and reevaluate the FBI's means and methods of investigating. I guess we'll put investigating in scare quotes now. These potential suspects are what's clearly something that's not working to the benefit of the American people. Now, how are we going to apply this to Mateen? This is important. In addition to the investigations that were conducted by the FBI into Mateen's conduct, there's a very real possibility that Mateen himself was being handled or lulled into radical jihad, which culminated in the attack that took place in Orlando. And one piece of information that would lead credence to this comes from a New York Daily News report that claims Mateen was actually a regular at the Pulse Bar. the article, Orlando shooter was regular at Pult's gay club. Former classmate says Omar Mateen was homosexual. All right, I'm not going to go through that whole article. It's too long. The guy was a regular at the gay club. Now, if Mateen began frequenting Pult's around 3 years ago, that would mean he would have begun frequenting Pult's around 2013. That would put his first foray into being a regular at the club around the same time as his first investigation at the hands of the FBI, wouldn't it? So, we got to ask the question, was Mateen blackmailed into terror for his sexuality? Or was he recruited, radicalized, and facilitated by U.S. intelligence, and then those regular visits to Pult's merely an act of casing the joint, getting to know people there, and so forth? Did he think he was part of an anti-terror operation? Did he think he was part of a drill? Did he really believe he was fighting jihad? All those are good questions. So it's admitted that Mateen was introduced to informants around this time. So what did they tell him? What did they do with him? The answers to those questions are likely never to be known, but what is known is that the FBI keeps records of these types of things, so the organization has some serious explaining to do regardless. Let's get some lawyers involved, and let's get these records subpoenaed in some way. We want to see the records. The FBI is notorious for their note-taking, right? Let's get those notes out there. Now, I want to get into a couple of other questionable aspects of this, and we've got to leave it alone. The mainstream news organizations' attempts, there were reports early on that there were more than one shooter. And actually, these reports came out somewhat later. Well, they were early, but we didn't hear about them until later. The reason being because they tried to shut the reports up. We have Janil Gonzalez, who was in the club on the night of the shooting. He says that there must have been more than one perpetrator. Okay, there were a couple of several witnesses who said it wasn't just Mateen who was shooting. There were other guns going off, and the other guy, Gonzalez, says that there was some guy holding the door shut to keep them from getting out. Now, we had one report from WSB-TV in Atlanta, Channel 2's sister station to Orlando WFTV. They reported that they expect an arrest in connection to the Orlando nightclub shooting that left 50 dead, including the shooter. All right, another arrest, not just Mateen, another arrest for an alleged accomplice. This is after this information got out. There was no interest in another accomplice, and we haven't heard anything since. But we have Janil Gonzalez, all right? He was in the club the night of the shooting, and he says that there must have been more than one perpetrator. And he did an interview with the Palm Beach Post where he pointed out that there was a second man holding the door shut and keeping everybody inside. And I won't go through his entire statement. It's very long. You can check it out. But he also says that there were other shots being fired, not just from Mateen. Now, at this point, I want to ask also, we've got one guy with an AR-15 and a handgun, and he goes into a club, the bouncers. That's one question, with an AR-15. These things are not easily concealable. But let's say he kicks in the door, he gets in, he gets past the bouncers. He kills 50 people, wounds 53. That's 103 shots that hit a target, right? 50 fatal ones, 53 that were not fatal. That's an awful lot of ammo. That's some very good shooting, in fact. What are the odds of that? One shooter going into a club with that much ammo. How did he conceal that much ammo? Take a look at, 103 rounds for an AR-15. See how that is concealable. That's another question. But let's look at the security firm, right? Despite all the investigation into Mateen's ideology, his connections with known terrorists, he was still able to gain not only a gun, and I know the anti-gun left wants to harp on that. The anti-gun left has a mental illness as well, because this is an obsession. But he also gained a security clearance as part of his job. The most interesting aspect of Mateen's employment was that he worked for G4S Secure Solutions. Anybody know what that is? That's Wackenhut, right? That's the one of the most notorious and largest security firms in the United States and in Europe. It's Wackenhut, and it's notorious for its connections to the FBI, the CIA, the military-industrial complex, and the shadow government apparatus here and abroad as well. So not only does Wackenhut and G4S have a board that reads like a list of some of the world's most powerful intelligence players, or the country's most powerful intelligence players, but it's been closely involved in the surveillance, espionage, innumerable clandestine operations. The organization essentially has a revolving door with the CIA, and it functions as another wing of the intelligence community. So it's funny, if you're a veteran and you express that you have PTSD, or you feel like maybe you're just not feeling yourself, the medical establishment and the law enforcement establishment, closely intertwined, can come and take your guns from you. If you remember the guy who was part of the American Preppers show, I think it was the History Channel or one of these channels. He was a prepper. He was doing a television show about all his prepping. Guy was on national TV. Went to the doctor. Said he had a heart attack, and the doctor was checking up on him, and the doctor asked him, "How do you feel?" And he said, I kind of feel like blowing out my brains, right? They don't feel great. So the doctor has the police go out, calls the police, tells them the guy's a danger, and the police take his guns, violate his Second Amendment, violate his Fourth Amendment. And this guy, who is not a threat, clearly not a domestic extremist, on national TV, says that he, in an obvious joke, wants to blow his own brains out, but at worst means he's only going to harm himself. The police come out and take his guns, violate his constitutional rights, and just confiscate his property and his Second Amendment right. But Mateen can express support for ISIS and deal with actual terrorists and be a threat and be investigated, and nobody violates his Second Amendment. In fact, he gets a security clearance. Anyway, we have the right-wing media now blaming Muslims. You've got the Donald Trump fascists claiming that it's we can't let Muslims into the country. Muslims are the problem. It's all Muslims. The same tired tripe that we got after 9/11. And then we have the left-wing media blaming guns. Yes, because if a tree falls in the forest and there's nobody to hear it, it's because a gun shot it. That's the left's logic with guns. If it would be more effective if thinking individuals, which would exclude the right-wingers and the left-wingers, would examine the possibilities that this attack was actually a false flag incident that was designed to push an agenda that would benefit people in power in some way or the other. Out of this attack, we'll no doubt see another push for the evisceration of the Second Amendment. You're already seeing that. Other civil liberties being dismantled, you're seeing that. And a greater attempt at justification for foreign adventures, and you're seeing that as well. So, now, can we prove that this Orlando shooting is a false flag? Of course, we can't, because we don't have access or the ability to do this. We don't have the resources to conduct an investigation of this scale. But I think with this, with the information that I've put forward, we can say that this was most likely a false flag. And of course, we reject any attempts to cut back the Second Amendment or to violate the rights of other people here in the United States. Now, let's move on. We can't stay on this the whole show. We virtually did, but we can't do the whole show on this. We have a couple of reports coming out in Syria. We've got a confirmation of what we already knew since the beginning of the crisis, but up until this point, the authorities have tried to deny it. But that's the French special forces are active on the ground in Syria, and we have this reports by the French news agency AFP that the French special forces troops are working alongside terrorists in northern Syria in order to guide the operation to retake Manbij. And the French soldiers are working alongside the SDF, which is a loose coalition of terrorists, the YPG, the Kurds, Arabs, other groups supported by the U.S. and NATO. And I realize that we may have drawn some ire by saying that the SDF is a loose coalition of terrorists. Well, that's what they are. The YPG that's been slaughtering Christians and Assyrians, we're no fans of the YPG with their brainwashed insanity of communism. If you ever want to see a cult, take a look at these groups, these communist brainwashed cults. The French Defense Ministry told AFP, quote, "The offensive at Manbij is clearly being backed by a certain number of states, including France. It's the usual support. It's advisory." That's the quote. But up until this point, France only publicly acknowledged the presence of 150 Special Forces fighters operating in Iraq, in the Kurdistan region. We had Jean-Yves Le Drian, French defense minister, told a French television channel that France was not only providing air support and arms to rebels, but offering tactical advice. He didn't mention the deployment of the special forces, but we have French Army spokesman Colonel Gilles Geron stating, "We never go into details about anything to do with special forces, which are by their nature special. You won't get any details to protect these men's activities." So the official government response is that they're not there. But we have information being leaked that they are. And it's not the first time the French have been revealed as being present in Syria. It was reported early on in the destabilization that 13 French military officers that were acting as mercenaries and death squad participants were captured by the Syrian government. All the while, mainstream media reported the events as a peaceful protest and grassroots level organic Syrian uprising against an oppressive regime. So, around about the same time, we have hacked emails that were obtained by Anonymous in December 2011 and then released by WikiLeaks and steady drips ever since February 27, 2012, revealed that NATO troops, including those from the US, UK, and France, were likely already operating inside Syria. And the emails were obtained from Stratfor, military-industrial complex firm, and were apparently sent by Stratfor's director of analysis, Reva Bala, and they had a discussion of a December confidential Pentagon meeting, which was attended by, quote, "senior analysts from the U.S. Air Force and representatives from its chief allies, France and the United Kingdom." The email's author stated that U.S. officials said without saying that Special Operations Forces teams, presumably from the U.S., UK, France, Jordan, and Turkey, are already on the ground focused on reconnaissance missions and training opposition forces. And then later in the email, it was stated that the idea was hypothetically to commit guerrilla attacks, assassination campaigns, try to break the back of the Alawite forces and elicit collapse from within. So that shouldn't come as a surprise, since Western troops and intelligence agents have maintained a heavy presence inside Libya during the destruction of that nation, increased the presence as the destabilization and subsequent invasion succeeded. Now we've got a few more minutes left, and I want to also talk about the French military bases. So we have the United States, France, and we have Britain moving in special forces as well to assist the terrorists in destroying Syria. We have Jordanian and Turkish officers joining in the anti-Assad coalition, as well, of course, as the Israelis. We also have, on the other side, Russian special forces on the ground inside Syria fighting with the Syrian military, Iranian Hezbollah fighters on the side of Syria. We have the United States, Russia, building military bases in the northern regions of Syria so they can use those bases as staging grounds for new operations. But we also now have something new. We have a source which is cited by Sputnik. Now, this is the Russian mouthpiece, but French forces are apparently the ones that are stationed in northern Syria being involved in the construction of a military base near Ain al-Arab, that's Kobani, in the Aleppo province. The source said the French have begun constructing a military base similar to the U.S. military bases. French experts and military advisors working in the region will be stationed there. The source also reported that the U.S., UK, and French experts are stationed in Manbij, and that's where there's been a big battle between the SDF and the ISIS forces. We had a political analysis, and former deputy foreign minister of the Kobani canton, Idris Nassin, told Sputnik that not only were the French forces in Manbij attempting to build a base, but they were tasked with training and supporting SDF forces alongside U.S. soldiers. This is his quote. He says, French soldiers arrived in Kobane along with U.S. troops to take part in liberating Manbij. They are primarily tasked with coordinating airstrikes of the U.S.-led coalition, consulting and providing training to Manbij's military council and the Syrian Democratic Forces. France also intends to build military base in Kobane. However, contrary to earlier reports, construction works will not take place at the Mistiner Hill. The facility will instead be located to the south of Kobane. He goes on, in addition, this area is not suitable for building a base due to security reasons. The French forces have been stationed at a cement factory to the south of Kobane. Now, Manbij is strategically significant because it serves as virtually the last link between the northern border region and Raqqa, which is the ISIS capital that the Syrian military currently has in its sights. If the NATO powers are able to seize, by virtue of using the SDF proxies and the military forces that way, the control over Manbij, it's going to be an opportunity to keep the ISIS supply lines running open to Raqqa. So that's why they're so interested in Manbij. Now, there's a whole lot more we could say about the Syrian crisis and the things that are taking place there now. But we only have a few minutes left in the show, so I want to transition to some domestic issues. We have the fight to end the ridiculous drug war continuing. We've got legislation being advanced by a New Jersey Assembly committee that would allow people suffering with post-traumatic stress disorder to participate in the state's medical marijuana program. The bill, it's not what we want to see, which is complete legalization, but it's a step in the right direction. It would add PTSD to the list of illnesses that can be legally treated in New Jersey using medical marijuana. The Oversight Committee voted 3-0 to forward the bill to the full Assembly. We have Assemblyman Ronald Dancer abstaining from the vote. In March 2015, the Assembly actually approved a bill, a similar bill, but it died in the Senate committee. Chairman of the Oversight Committee and co-sponsored the bill, Assemblyman Gusciora, is more optimistic about the chances this time. But we had a major turning point. There was a testimony of a U.S. Army soldier who had returned from 3 tours of duty from Iraq and Afghanistan. And he gave his testimony. It was quite touching, I guess. Philip Doom, who pointed out the extraordinary high rates of suicide with people suffering from PTSD. Philip Doom is the Army soldier. He said, it helps me out. It's the one reason I'm able to speak to you guys. It helps me focus. It helps me calm down. It helps me sleep. There was also testimony from Dr. Alexander Neumeister, a Brooklyn psychologist who conducted research into PTSD in the brain, testified before the committee and said the people who use it report it as safe and highly effective. Well, yeah, that's something everybody's known since marijuana has been a thing, right? That it's been reported as safe and highly effective. So, not surprisingly, though, the Garden State Goring, Governor Chris Christie, is attempting to resist the expansion of the medical marijuana program, which he's calling a front for legalization. Or he called it that in 2014. His statement on the matter, and not all unexpected at all. It just reiterates the vast disconnect between the positions of the American people and the ones that hold elected office. Christie's constant harping about his love for the U.S. military, it appears his loyalty ends when the troops come home. If there's a war to be fought, Christie's always the most patriotic man in the room. But once those soldiers return and they need assistance, Christie takes a different attitude. It's either shape up or shut up. That's a motto that served Christie and other thuggish officials well in the past. But there are many other people in the state of New Jersey that suffer from PTSD than just military personnel. This leaves them out in the cold. So Christie worries that the expansion of the medical marijuana program is a front for legalization. It's not. But New Jersey, you guys got to ask the question, exactly what would be the problem with that? Would New Jersey's jails suddenly have more space? Would New Jersey police be able to focus on violent crime? Would we be able to take a step toward a world where we didn't throw peaceful people into cages for possessing a plant? That's the direction we should take. Despite the constant propaganda that's coming from law enforcement and government and corporations, the plant has yet to cripple the New Jersey subway system. It's yet to intentionally create traffic jams for reasons of spite and extortion, and it's yet to privatize the state's public pension system. So there are many problems facing the state of New Jersey, but marijuana clearly isn't one of them. And if there's ever a shortage of the food supply in New Jersey, I think Chris Christie will be, an imminent danger to the welfare of the people of the state. So this guy he's got to go as well. And hopefully his disastrous showing in the presidential race will help show him the door soon enough. So that's what we're hoping for. Now, I mentioned we're going to try to get a platform points up on the website. We were doing that. We were in the process of getting that up, but of course the Orlando shooting took place, and that kind of pulled us away from the ability to get those platform points up. But we should have them up very soon for people to peruse and take a look at and use as a guide. I don't care what, you can print them up, put them on a flyer, and just hand out the platform points. You can build a platform and explain, argue the points yourself, and hand those out, or argue for those, run for office. It doesn't matter, but these are tools that you can use. These are demands that we want to see, and you can go out and fight for them. So now we've got something to fight for. We can go out and fight, and you can give people a direction. People want to know how you pay for it. You can show them how you pay for it. People want to know what you want, what you're complaining about. You can show them what you want. You can fight for that, and then you have something you can make the people in power concede to you. So we'll get that up as soon as we can. Again, BrandonTurbeville.com is where you need to be going on a daily basis. That site's updated daily. We're going to have a lot of new additions to the site pretty soon. And tonight, ladies and gentlemen, this has been Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. We'll see you next week.
JJ from Against the Wall, and you're listening to ECY.TV.
Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt, and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 12th of June 2016. And the first thing I'd like to mention is that I had to go into Sudbury on Friday. And even though this area is notorious for extra heavy spraying, I think it's partly it was a test area, I'm sure, for new sprays from these high-flying jets. But also this is where the top of one of the streams, the airstreams, loops right here. And then it goes down back into the States, into Buffalo, New York, and so on. So they used to call it Cancer Alley, by the way, when Detroit, Michigan, and so on had all the big industry on the go. It would blow up this way, and then loop here, and then come down. And up here, they've got all the mines, lots of mines in Sudbury, so they give off the big smokestacks as well. So that stuff, all added to it, the mix went down back into the States. And of course, all that's pretty well gone except for the mines in Sudbury, and they put higher stacks on, so it's blown right across the sky to the east, to North Bay pretty well, another place. And that's how they deal with that kind of problem. But we're getting sprayed now heavily with sprays. And I remember I read years ago the fact that the history of aerial and military testing on populations in different countries. Canada did lead the field. Don Scott was an excellent researcher, and he went into the brucellosis triangle, he called it, one of the books he wrote, to do with the use of brucellosis as a basis for a particular germ warfare, and took parts of that, mixed it with other things, and then tested them in Canada, and stuff was declassified from the government. That's what he managed to get. Never stopped, really, this kind of stuff. But anyway, this area is famous, as I say, for spraying new types of things before they'll dose the rest of the populations across the world with it. And that's what you have to come to your own conclusions by investigating all this stuff. There's a lot of material out there, a lot of declassified stuff, and it's up to you if you want to read it or not. The mainstream media is never going to touch on it, but part of the military's own declassified information from the US, Britain, Canada, and so on is to do with the testing of weather patterns. In other words, these jet streams that come in, and the use of them for warfare purposes. So that's why I think, since it loops here and goes back down again, I think they can watch how it spreads down that area, and they've got the population down pat in that area, and they can keep tabs on their health. Because all the medical records, especially in Canada, are linked together and go straight to Ottawa, to a central computer. So they've got real-time information on doctors' visits, clinics, walk-in clinics, all that kind of stuff, and hospitals. So data's always being collected. But the same thing too of Norwich in England, with the British Navy being used to test out different gases and bacterium which they'd released from ships back in the 60s and 70s, and it was spreading across the mainland, and you could follow the patterns of it too. They always tell you it's harmless and yada yada yada, and it was just to test out a harmless substance to see how it would work if our enemies would ever release stuff in the country. That's what they tell you, but it's nonsense, of course. We're all disposable, really. Even the folk who help do this should understand that they themselves are disposable, maybe even more so if they know too much, anybody involved in it, because they're watched more than anybody else. I was fascinated reading a lot of declassified information from Russia, the Soviet Russia, that is, where they did tell you how their bureaucracies worked with their various secret police and agencies and government agencies and so on. They spied upon the public. And what I pretty well knew, but it reaffirmed it, was that that's what all countries do. Those in the know who work for governments are watched more closely and monitored more closely than the general population. Massively so, actually. Because, you see, they'd be more believable when they come out with something that they know that either they've been involved in or the country's been involved in. than Joe Blow on the road. They can always poo-poo the average person at the bottom, you see, who's not involved in it, you see. That's why two professors are carefully selected, always have been, mind you, maybe more so today, because they help drive by indoctrinating another branch of world managers, really. So they must be able to heavily indoctrinate them into the century of change. That's what we're in today. So they're carefully chosen. A lot of them do very little at all, actually, but they're there to help pick out new world managers in different departments of agencies and so on for the general population on behalf of the masters who put them in as professors. And that's really how things actually work. And we know that many people in the US were picked by the CIA at college by professors. That's what they actually watch out for possible prospects from people who won't question anything, they'll never disclose anything, and etc., etc. Same in every other country, it's done the same way. So getting back to the spraying on Friday, it was amazing because whenever I stopped anywhere in Sudbury, I noticed even average people stopping to look up because it was just a mess of aircraft all over the place, going in all different directions, and leaving these heavy trails behind them. And by the end of the day, you had the usual heavy eggshell colour across the whole sky. By that evening, it was blustery, very, very windy. Same the next day with rain. The temperatures were falling until today, this is Sunday, it's going to go down to about 40 degrees Fahrenheit, which is only about 3 or 4 degrees, I think, centigrade. And it's been this actually for weeks now, this temperature at night. And this is summer. This is summer, folks. But this is the age of transition, which is change. I've been prattling about that for a long time. And since through the 20th century, the real world managers were indoctrinating students who would then go into different fields or academia as well, and they would also preach why we must change everything, the century of change, and that's what they called it, the century of transition as well. Transition is the buzz term. Trans. Everything has to change, including your own, especially your ability to be self-aware and come to your own conclusions. You're being taught by various means that any conclusions you have to be ratified by experts. And if they're not, you could be in trouble. Don't think for yourself. Live in a bit of a fear, actually, if you feel unsure of yourself with your own thoughts and conclusions you've come to, because you're going to suffer for having the wrong conclusions, you see. Thought crime. And even little quips you might make in conversation, or musings, which are just like talking aloud as you go through possibilities of all kinds of things, could be wrong, you see, could be reported. And you're in that phase now with all the laws that are being rammed through. Century of change, trans, you see. Everything's trans. Trans-specific partnerships, etc. And you've got transgenders of all kinds now, and now you've got folk into even going into various things with animals and all that. It's quite something to see what's under the microscope as you're being taught, like O'Brien said to Winston in George Orwell's 1984. I, being part of the elite, if I say I can fly, Winston's, you'll believe I can fly. He also said to him under torture, he says, how many fingers have I had, on and on and on. And eventually Winston says, okay, even though he saw it was maybe 4 or 5 up or whatever it was, he'd say 5 eventually. Because the question was that George Orwell said, or the answer that George Orwell kept giving, was that 2 and 2 are 4, and that was the right to say so. And O'Brien would hold 5 up, etc. So if I say that's 4, then it's 4. If I say 3 is actually 4, then that'll be. And it was constantly changing. And so if you came to your own conclusions, you'd be tortured. Don't trust your own instincts, rationale, anything else. You must go by the expert. So update your PC training all the time. All the time. If you're unsure of what to say nothing. Say, I don't know. You see? Because it's becoming very dangerous now to come to your own conclusions or have opinions. Maybe by your own life's experiences or nasty experiences. It's unsafe now to have opinions, you see. And I only mean that. The idea of everything that's happening on such an incredible scale, all over the place, generally brought forward by professors at the top, experts, again, you see experts, is that, there's one in Australia. I've mentioned him before. He's out there. He's been on Australian television many times, and panels, discussion panels. A bioethicist, they call him, and a philosopher. He's pushing for, and that's Mr. Singer, Pete Singer, and he's openly advocated it's okay for people to have sex with animals and things like that, you see. And he gives absolutely ridiculous reasons for it all. Oh, in the past, you'll see old pottery from Greece with a human-like figure having sex with whatever happened to be their animal. But what he's not telling you is these were no supernatural creatures. They weren't men at all having sex. These were emblems of the godhood, having sex with another symbol of the zodiac, because they had stags and that in their zodiac, different animals. So they'll use these things to deceive the average person. That must be normal. If it's always been around, these depictions, it must be quite normal, you see. So, and I said this back in 2001, that they had their big international meeting to do with the censor committees for television, radio, and so on. And they're not there to protect you, never were. They were there to see if it was now time to push the envelope to another step. And they said now they'd won all the different rights for certain segments of society. They now push for the rights of bestiality. And they're actually changing some of the codes now to do with bestiality, to make it lesser of an offence, as long as there's no actual penetration, you see. And they'll use all kinds of ridiculous excuses or court cases that are current or fairly current to try and push this through, you see. By that technique, they could pick anything and normalize anything by redefining. And let's look at this word. Let's look at this word and see what it really, really means, eh? And that's how the U.S. Constitution gets changed all the time too. Let's see what, in modern terminology, this word or that phrase means, and that way you can change it into any meaning that you want. There's nothing new in this technique, you understand? Nothing new at all. George Orwell, remember, he knew what was coming. He had been a student at one point under Aldous Huxley, and they exchanged many, many letters on what kind of totalitarian system the masters would bring in, because they knew something that they knew all pretty well in Britain anyway, and probably the US too, and the Commonwealth, the British Commonwealth. They knew the leaders, the real leaders of who owned these countries, you see. And they knew that they had international meetings, even going back into the 1800s, and probably the 1700s as well. They knew what it was supposed to come to, and that the fact that the elite always looked upon the people as being completely malleable, you see, as a big herd of creatures that had no real minds of their own. They just followed the leader, you see. So you supply the leaders, and away it goes. Now, the reason I mentioned the Australian Peter Singer is he's also classified as self-professed as a bioethicist, you see, which is like having opinions. They're authorized by some big funder behind you. Who knows who it happens to be? There's so many of them out there, but they're all connected at the top, the ones who guide society. They decide about, bioethics and who should live, who should die, all that kind of stuff too, and really alter, eventually through law, what human life is, and then other kinds of life as well. Sometimes they start with other kinds of life and work up to the human. But they give themselves authority each time they open their mouths, and because that's how it's done. And the media, again, has editors all working for the same big global corporation, Inc., are quite happy to publish it all and give them lots of exposure. All kinds of media. In fact, all the media is out there. So that's how they get publicity. And eventually, just because you hear them more often, you think it must be, well, they truly are an expert. I don't hear so many folk preaching the same stuff as this particular guy who sits back all relaxed, like the typical Hollywood